Today we have the U.S. Senator from Hawaii, Brian Schatz. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you had a pretty amazing moment on the Senate floor a few days back where you called out Republican Senator Josh Hawley for blocking Defense Department nominees, all while criticizing Biden for not doing enough on Ukraine as he was voting against Ukraine aid and demanding everyone that he doesn't like resign, and after he exonerated Trump for withholding lethal aid to Ukraine. And yet, despite all of this blatant hypocrisy, we just don't usually see that kind of stuff, like your speech coming out of the Senate. What led to that moment, and what's the response been like from both, those of us who are in your party and people on the other side of the aisle as well?
Well, it was a bit unexpected. I mean, I didn't, I knew I was going to go up and ask for unanimous consent. I was going to go and take a floor action to try to get this nominee confirmed because it's necessary. I mean, this person is in charge of logistics for the Department of Defense. And I think, lots of, regular folks don't pay a lot of attention to defense logistics, except now that we're watching sort of every twist and turn of this Russian war, we understand the importance of having your logistics chain, your transportation, your fuel, your electricity, your food. All of that really very much matters and differentiates our United States military from other powerful militaries because we get all of that stuff right, but it's not automatic. You need leadership, and this person was very well qualified to lead logistics for the Department of Defense. So I was just, angry and trying to get this person confirmed, thinking maybe that I could. And then Hawley sort of just launched into his set piece. It was like a 12-minute, he had flip charts. Like he just wanted to use it as an excuse to blast the Biden administration's foreign policy. And I had no prepared remarks to respond to that because it just didn't occur to me that he was going to be so ridiculous. And then I just got angry and started sort of shouting. And I was talking to I have three brothers, no sisters, and I'm the youngest. And so my brothers separately texted me and so like, I've seen that version of you. I was just mad. And I think the reason that it resonated is not because it was some extraordinary piece of oration, but just like it resonated because everyone else is so pissed off and kind of wondering why a person who raised his fist in solidarity with the people who tried to overthrow the American government is still treated like a member in good standing. And like, I guess we're not supposed to mention that because it's old. And so I do think that one of the things Democrats have to do, even if it feels redundant, even if you don't want to be that guy that's always sort of reminding people about the insurrection, and even if the pollsters tell us that it's like not the number one issue, we still have to remind people that what's coming up as a choice for voters is between a party that believes in democracy and a party that doesn't. And what strikes me, Brian, as a important proof point is I don't think a lot of people know whether President Zelensky is left, right, or center, because it's entirely beside the point, right? He's pro-democracy, so we're for him. And we've got to build a pro-democracy movement in the United States that includes conservatives, old school conservatives. And it's not to say that the center of gravity shouldn't be on the progressive left. Of course it should, but we ought to welcome people into the pro-democracy movement, if for no other reason than no other issue can be solved without a functioning democracy, but also it's a really smart way to win.
Well, look, to that point, we have people like you. We have people like just recently Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, who ripped into her Republican colleague for fundraising off the idea that she was grooming kindergartners. You've both captured a lot of attention across the country these last few days, and I think it's just the authenticity of calling out their bullshit, right? And yet that's not something that we usually get. We get slogans and canned answers and the usual politicking. So has there been any discussion among other Democrats on how to better approach these issues? Like how to focus on people like you as a model for how to respond to this stuff, as opposed to what we're doing right now, which the argument can be made is not exactly working?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not sure I should be a model, but I would say this. I think we've got a lot of very talented communicators, and oftentimes they are talked out of what they really want to say by a bunch of less talented political operatives who take a very arithmetic approach, a very linear approach to public opinion, which is to say, they take a poll and they say, okay, this is where the public is. So meet them where they are, right? And look, I'm not above looking at a poll. And if something is deeply unpopular, I'm probably going to avoid it unless it's a question of core values. But I'm not suggesting that no politician should ever review polling information and use it to be more persuasive. What I am saying is that a poll doesn't tell you how you, as a leader, how the grassroots engaged can move public opinion. And my favorite example of this was when former President Trump instituted the Muslim ban, right? And Murphy and Booker and Mazie Hirono and others were, and Liz Warren and others were really pissed. And there were some pollsters who quietly came to us and said, hey, be careful, this thing's a little dicey, blah, blah, blah. And we just essentially told them, like, go pound sand, because there are some things that you just don't take a poll on. And it was our collective outrage that moved the polling numbers, right? The idea is that public leaders ought to be able to move public opinion. Now, there are limits to that, of course, in an increasingly polarized world with an increasingly insane Republican Party. But we have to remember that the idea is not to figure out what people already think and then say that. The idea is to figure out what we want to say and how it can be most persuasive.
I was speaking with Jamie Raskin a few weeks ago, and he told a story about how he was on the campaign trail, and someone told him, everything that you said was great, but stay away from the gay marriage stuff. And it's not where we all are. It's not where the party is. It's not where the country is. And he said, well, it was at that point that I realized I don't want to be in the political center. I want to be in the moral center. And so that's why you're elected, as opposed to just that's why these people are your political leaders, right? As opposed to just appealing to the lowest common denominator, appealing to the
That's
easiest.
right. And I also think, I remember this with Obama. Whenever he got more forceful, he got more popular with the base, but he also got more popular with swing voters, because swing voters are imagined to be this kind of like mythical, kind of exactly in the middle on all the issues. And the truth is, swing voters are heterodox ideologically, sometimes not sure what they think, or sometimes sure what they think, but it doesn't fit neatly between the parties. And what they look for is some sense of passion, authenticity, yes, but conviction is what people want to see in folks. And it is not always a take the left wing position, take the right wing position, and then split the difference. And that's what's going to be attractive to the middle voter, because the middle voter often is a disengaged voter who's just pissed off at every politician. And if you sound like every other politician, it doesn't matter if you split the ideological difference, they don't like you.
Well, look, you had mentioned polarization today. We see so often where the evidence is so insurmountable against someone on the right, for example, and yet their party and their supporters don't seem to care. Do you think that we're able to overcome, this polarization that we see today to actually sway people still?
Look, I don't know in the sort of short run that, we're going to be able to depolarize. And it is an international phenomenon. But what I think is that if we are focused on the right things, and if we come from a place of conviction, and we are unafraid to describe the modern Republican Party accurately, right? And the problem is that actually we are afraid to describe the modern Republican Party accurately because it makes you sound like a frothing partisan, right? I just sort of didn't go to the Senate to be some sort of like Democratic warrior against the Republic. I like the aspect of the Senate where you actually have to work on a bipartisan basis. So even as I want to describe things accurately, I'm like, God, that makes me sound a little nutty, right? But the problem is that it's true. The problem is that one of the primary selling propositions of the Biden presidency was that you could put him in power, you could put Democrats in power, and you could stop worrying about these nut jobs because the adults would be in charge. And I think, unfortunately, we can't stop worrying about the nut jobs. The fever did not break. And in fact, there's now a new generation of MAGA Republicans who are determined and I think are going to politically live beyond Donald Trump. And so it wasn't as simple as just vanquishing him electorally. and he may come back and we may have to do that again. It is about essentially a creeping authoritarianism in the United States. And we need to take that very, very seriously and not let some center left pundit tell us we're talking about the wrong thing and what is the point of doing a January 6th committee anyway, because I think basically what people want to see in us is a sense that we know why we're in office, we know what we're fighting for, and it's America itself. I'll just make one tactical point. Usually the midterms are lost by the party that seems to have overreached, right? And usually that's in the legislative sense of the word. They tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act and they got shellacked. We passed the Affordable Care Act and people were grouchy about it until they figured out what was in it, and we got shellacked. This election cycle is a little bit different in the sense that although we are the kind of incumbent party holding the trifecta, we still have a very, very strong case to make that these other guys are terrifying and you should not put them in power. And that's not an abstraction, and that's not just an excuse for not having enacted, this or that bill. I think that is at least part of the best case for voting in the midterms, is that these people may actually dismantle democracy itself. They have a plan. They tried to execute it last time. They've now got more people, more secretaries of state running for office, more county clerks running for office, more crazy people in positions of power to try to execute a coup, maybe not by storming the Capitol, but maybe just by lawyering up and counting the votes wrong.
To your point of overreaching, we've also got in the States, we've got abortion bans that are aggressively unpopular. We've got book bans. We've got, everything that you can imagine in the States. These are not one-offs. These are blueprints for what Republicans will do once they have power more broadly. Speaking of these legislative wins, we've got midterms approaching. Biden is losing support among young people and progressives. And like it or not, midterms are a referendum on the president. There are a few issues that are especially important to progressives, and that includes marijuana legalization and canceling student debt. What would you like to see the president and Congress do on these issues, and what is the likelihood of one or the other getting it done?
Canceling student debt is within the president's authority, and I think he should do it. I think it's good public policy. I think it's good economic policy not to have this generation, actually a couple of generations, saddled with an extraordinary amount of debt. I just don't think that's good economics. And there's no particular a sort of macroeconomic reason not to do it. It's not going to increase inflation. There's a kind of, hey, I paid my dues. Why are these guys getting a break argument against it? But I find that to be just not particularly compelling. But that's in the executive branch. And I do think the president has authority in that space. I would like to see the president evolve a little further on marijuana, although obviously it's a big improvement over Donald Trump, but it's kind of similar to where Obama was, which means we haven't made a ton of progress, even though in lots and lots and lots of states, marijuana is effectively legal. It's not federally legal. It's difficult to bank. We haven't done the reforms on the criminal justice side. We can't even research through FDA its potential medicinal benefits. And by the way, the Coast Guard is still on the high seas seizing marijuana, right? And then they do a press conference with a bunch of marijuana on the side. And it's I don't know, a mile and a half from a marijuana shop.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can walk into any, I'm in California. I'm in California. You can walk into any weed shop as if it's a liquor store, as if it's an Apple store, and buy weed perfectly legally.
Yeah, and out of the port of Los Angeles, these Coast Guard vessels are catching the bad guys with marijuana on board.
Right.
Look, I'm not one of these people who thinks we should move all the way to saying marijuana is medicine. I'm more on the libertarian side, which is to say, this is clearly something people use. It is clearly something in which Black and brown people are incarcerated at 5 times the rate for marijuana possession as white people, even though they use marijuana at the same rates. And so to me, this is a justice issue. And to the extent that I'm, sort of on the social side, libertarian and a live and let live kind of person, I just think it's time for us to move on. I also would just add, and I think this is probably the main point you're getting at, which is this is a very powerful electoral issue. Left, right, and center, people are just let's get on with it. And it is an opportunity for us to demonstrate the difference between the parties. And of course, it matters to people, in the 18 to, let's say, 38 age bracket.
Let's move on to climate. How do you reconcile the need to make sure that prices stay low enough so that Democrats can stay in power without pissing off too many people, with the need to transition to renewables as quickly as possible? Because, the most recent UN report found that we have until 2025 to stop increasing emissions. We have until 2030 to reduce them by at least 43%. You represent an island. You're also a young guy, so I think you have a pretty vested interest in stopping the worst effects of climate change.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts. First, I think what President Biden is doing makes sense in terms of providing a million barrels a day from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And I think we ought to just understand that we currently have a system that operates on fossil fuels, and that even the most passionate climate activists, if they're honest, understands that that's not something you can swap out overnight. And therefore, unless you think people shouldn't have electricity or gasoline in their cars, that we're going to have to provide for our current system as we transition to a better one. So that's number one. Number two is clean energy is cheaper. Clean energy is cheaper in terms of foreign policy. It's cheaper in terms of the, what they call externalities, the pollution that it doesn't cause. But it's also literally cheaper. Like per electron, it is now officially cheaper. Not in every instance, I understand that. And of course, there's the difference between generating electrons and then putting fuel in something and lighting it on fire to combust and go someplace. So, it gets rather technical. But the short version is that if you are worried about prices over the long run, or if you are worried about the United States government or the United States citizenry funding petro-fascists, the best way to move on from all of this nonsense, whether it's the Middle East, or South America, or Russia, the best way to move on is to just develop our own clean energy resources. And by the way, this is no longer a technical challenge. I worked in Hawaii with the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative now for about 20 years. And back a couple of decades ago, like this stuff was not settled, right? Intermittent energy, battery storage, how are we going to do this on the grid? We still have some of those challenges, but actually a lot of those technical challenges have been solved. And the technology is mostly there to get us at least 2/3 of the way home. The problem is a political one. We have a political system that has been overcome with fossil fuel money. And that's the problem. It is not like this stuff is infeasible. It's just that the politics haven't caught up with the reality that we need to do this.
What's the situation look like in Hawaii? I mean, that's a blue state through and through. You're not connected in the same way that the lower 48 countries are. What's the situation like out there with regard to renewable energy?
Well, we're doing great. I mean, we were at, I think, 30-40% clean energy, but that was because we used bagasse, which was a byproduct of the sugar plantation. But once that was gone, we went down to like 4, 5, 6% clean energy. Since then, we're now we passed a 100% clean energy law. And the cool thing about it is, I was in the legislature, I was in my late 20s. We passed this law, which was a voluntary renewable energy standard, 20% by, I think, 2020. And then it became a mandatory standard. And then, we basically made it tougher and tougher and ratcheted up our ambition every 3 to 5 years. And every time we set a new threshold, we exceeded it by a lot, because if you set the market in the direction of clean energy, it just goes. And so now we're into the 30% clean energy realm, which is more, by the way, than any of the technical people thought we could even handle on a grid. So now we have a 100% clean energy statute. By 2040, we'll be 100% clean energy. So, and it's very popular. Like we had the same, we had Indo-PACOM, the Pacific Command back then. We had the Waikiki hotels. We had the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable all freaking out and saying, we're going to have energy reliability problems. We're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and prices are going to go up. You shouldn't do this. We did it anyway. And then about 8 years later, they actually just decided this is pretty great for our economy, and there aren't power supply or power quality issues. So once we start to do this, it's going to look obvious and it's going to look ridiculous that we didn't do it a lot earlier.
Right, especially with, stuff like Russia going on right now, where the United States and Europe were funding to the tune of billions of dollars this genocidal war in Ukraine. Okay, let's finish off with this. What is your message to voters in terms of your pitch to keep Democrats in power in a midterm year where the party historically loses and with a president who has a low approval rating, to keep Democrats in power and expand our Senate majority so that we could eliminate the filibuster? What would Democrats be able to accomplish on climate with a functioning Senate majority?
If we get a Senate majority that gives us a little more room to maneuver, we can pass voting rights. We can pass marijuana reform. We can reduce the price of insulin and other prescription medication. We can give statehood to DC. We can take even more meaningful climate action. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, and I think this is worth saying, and I don't think politicians sort of relish talking about this, but there's a creeping authoritarianism in the United States. It is led by Donald Trump, but it is not exclusive to him. And they need to be beat. They need to be beat for practical reasons, which is to say Donald Trump is going around the country installing his cronies who are willing to ignore election results and overturn democracy itself. And that is worth fighting against. Whether it's a midterm or a presidential, the threat is real, and unfortunately, it has not gone away.
We'll leave it there. Brian Schatz, I hope to hear a lot more from you. Thanks for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.